And so he passes this law. The expense goes up because now, the work is the same when they had to work for 40 hours a week. But now they only have to work 35 hours, which means that they get more money by means of extra hours. And this increases the expense. This means that we will have to pay more taxes. This means that we will get even worse economically or financially speaking. But this president doesn't care about that. And he actually even makes fun of people when they criticize him, because he said that he had some doubts. And if the expense went up after he approved this measure, he would actually request the Constitutional Court to analyze this law, analyze it based on the constitutional principles. But he never did that. He only said he would do that, and then the expense rose. It even rose in the presidency. Presidency costs, the expense for having all those people around the president and so on, actually went up. And he blamed the 35 hours for that fact. The 35 hours that he approved, and that he said that if the expense went up, he would actually make sure that it was according to the Constitution, which is odd from the start, because if he had doubts, he should already have sent it to the Constitutional Court. But he didn't do it. And even when the expense went up, he also didn't do it, because it was a lie. He just doesn't care. He's as corrupt, and possibly even more corrupt than what we see with the socialists, because this guy, his political career is atrocious. He never did anything. He was only voted into president because he was a public TV figure. Another measure or law that he approved that was clearly against the principle of equality that I already explained from our Constitution was the minimum wage. Right now, the public servants, they get more minimum wage. They have a higher minimum wage than anyone else in the country. Everyone else gets a minimum wage of 600 euros, while the public servants have 635 euros. Again, approved by the president, claiming that he had doubts about it, but he approved it anyway. There are also other measures that he approved recently that are completely against that same principle, which is the so-called parity law. Parity law is essentially the feminist agenda in practice in Portugal, which means that more women should be placed in, to run for politician jobs, let's say, regardless of their qualifications for the job. This parity law, again, completely unconstitutional, because the gender of a person is being used to force that person into a job. It's clearly unconstitutional. According to our constitution, it's clearly unconstitutional. But this president passed it anyway recently. This guy goes to the extreme, as I already talked about with the tragic fires in 2017. More recently, we had a case where there was a disturbance in a very rough neighborhood. Portugal always had lots of immigration from African countries, because we had lots of colonies in the past, like Angola, Cabo Verde, Mozambique. Certain countries that still speak Portuguese, basically. And so we have a steady flow of immigration from those countries. And in Portugal, we have several neighborhoods, several cities that have a really high number of people from these countries. And some of them are quite rough. They are ghettos, basically, and where drugs are dealt and sold, where crime is committed with a higher rate than anywhere else. And there was a disturbance there, and the police was called by someone in that neighborhood. The police got to the place, and they were greeted with rocks. People started throwing rocks at them. Police obviously responded in the same kind. They had to deal with these people that were throwing rocks, and they used their batons to control them. And this is when someone in that neighborhood started making a video. Only after the video only starts after the police had already been thrown rocks to. And since it was started only after that fact, it almost seems like the police is, being brutal and using excessive violence to control the situation. And so it was called to be a racist event. Obviously, that was not the actual fact, and we knew almost immediately that the police were thrown rocks to, and there were injuries because of that fact to the police officers that were thrown rocks to. But the case blew out of proportion to be grabbed by the far left and to be considered a very serious case of racism in the police. And what do you think that our president did? Our republic has this president. He's the number one figure of our republic. And you would, I think, believe that this person, the first thing he would do in these cases, obviously suggesting for an investigation to know everything, but after we already knew that the police only responded to being thrown rocks to, what do you think that he did in this matter? What he did was he went to that neighborhood where the criminals that attacked the police were, and he took selfies with them. As you can see here, actually this guy over here next to the president, he was one of those that threw rocks to the police. And our president is there taking selfies with him. In fact, this president is called the Selfies man because he basically only travels the world at the expense of the taxpayer. He likes to take selfies with pretty much anyone because that's his form of populism, or actually the form of populism of the left in Portugal. They always try to do things that people like, but they never actually do things that are good for the people. And this guy goes to the extremes with the selfies. Last year, for example, there was a journalist following him, and he knew about it. He was actually transporting the journalist in his car and stuff like that when he was on vacation. It was a reality show, basically, which his comments about Trump, or when he met with Trump, are even more funnier in this context, because he promotes a reality show around his supposed amazing life as Portuguese president. He does absolutely nothing for the Portuguese people. In fact, he only travels at the expense of the taxpayer, as I already said, and pretty much nothing more. Oh, and of course he takes selfies with criminals. He actually never even met with the police after these events. The police, I think, only had, or was received by the presidency, but from someone else in the presidency, some of those underlings in the presidency. They were not met by the president. But he quickly went to the neighborhood where the criminals that threw rocks at the police and took selfies with them. That's the Portuguese president. That's how bad you can expect these corrupt criminals that are in Portuguese politics to be. And unfortunately, he's our president. It's unbelievable, but it's a fact. I think that's it in terms of this guy, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa. Probably the most populist and probably the worst president that Portugal has ever had. And he's only 2.5 years in his presidency, and he is already the worst. So you can see the level of these people, of this scum that we have in Portuguese politics, just by the fact that in so little time they can be so bad. I hope you like this, and I'll try to be back with next video about another character, politician, namely a leader of political party in Portugal that has representation in our parliament and that has been in power for the last almost 45 years. So I'll see you next time.